Welcome to the Triple D Podcast, Donuts, Disability, and Discourse, where host Michael Leiner talks to the best in the business about community, impact, business, and donuts. Here's your host, Michael Leiner.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the first edition, the inaugural episode of the Triple D Podcast, Donuts, Disability, and Discourse. We have a very special first guest today. I'm so excited to sit down with a good friend of mine and truly one of my mentors in the legal profession, Karl Osterhout. We are here today in Youngstown, Ohio, at the Landmark Restaurant and Bakery. Karl made the trip all the way. Where'd you come from today, Karl?
I live, and my office is in about 10 miles north of Pittsburgh.
Yeah. And what's so exciting about this, to me, about you being here, in addition to just being a titan in our industry in the disability law practice, is that you're someone who has, from the beginning of my practice, I feel like really watched me grow, but also just been such a mentor, professionally. And we met back in like 2014, 2015.
Yeah, it might have been 15 or 16 even, but it was definitely one of those networking events for Nader in St. Pete. I remember that.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw you from afar, but we really didn't even start talking that much until we just happened to be at the same end of a very long table one.
I remember it exactly. And what's cool is how, I remember just having been kind of like a student of the profession before that, not really anybody, when I was sitting down next to you eventually, talking to you, not even knowing who you were because of just, and this is something that I've always respected about you, and now you see how I dress every day, just so unassuming in all respects, but it almost like betrays how significant your career has been.
Yeah, I like to try to keep that a secret as much as possible.
When did you start handling disability cases?
Well, I got a job in 1984. I was in my first year of law school. I went at night, so I kept a day job all 4 years. And I went around one morning and I did 2 interviews. One was for like an insurance defense firm, and then with this other guy. His name was he's still around, Bob Pierce, who was sort of known in Pittsburgh. He was a politician, but was now back in law practice. And frankly, I think the only reason I got a job was that Bob and my father-in-law at the time both went to the same college and they played poker together. Right? I'm not sure there was any other reason why I got the job.
Do you remember your job interview with Bob Pierce?
Oh, absolutely, like it was yesterday.
What are there any like moments from it that stick out to you? It sounds like you connected over the college.
Well, he did. Like I was nervous, and I thought he's this kind of very tall, thin, geeky sort of looking guy, but real personable and talked about the job in a kind of elevated way. I mean, that I found out later he didn't really believe, but that was fine. It put me at ease in the conversation.
Were you hired to contribute to a disability practice or for something else that the firm was doing?
No. So when I was hired, he had a young attorney whose name you'll recognize, Cliff Farrell.
Sure.
And Cliff ended up becoming my supervisor. I was his, remember when you had to copy, maybe you don't. You used to have to send somebody down to the hearing office to copy files. So at first I was copying files and calling clients to ask them about, did they go to the doctor? Just crap, paralegal stuff. But within 6 weeks, Cliff is from Columbus, as you know, and he had gotten homesick for his girlfriend and for home and quit. Gave 2 weeks notice there. Didn't just walk out, but all of a sudden now it's just me and Bob doing Social Security cases. And even after 6 weeks, I think Bob knew less about it than I did.
Wow. It's funny how it feels so similar to me, the background. And I remember, right out of law school, and I'm excited because he's going to be one of our next guests on the podcast. The other person who I'd really call a great professional mentor, Dave Nager, who had a huge workers' compensation practice in Ohio, but a very small disability practice that I was brought in to grow. And I'll never forget my interview with him because it was a great interview. We connected. It was clear that we were going to be a fit and it was going to work out. And at the end, he goes, so when it comes to salary, what do you think would be an appropriate amount to pay? And I looked at him, and I'm 25 years old, just past the bar, don't know anything. And I said, what I know is you're going to wish that you could pay me $1 million. And what's funny about it is there was no backing for it at the time, but I really believed in, my ability to do something in the practice. But similar where, they really didn't have a social security disability practice. They were doing a few cases here and there. And what's cool is I've always thought that those first few years that I was working for him was when I learned how to run a business until I left and started my own thing. But then when I interacted with you, and I'd call him like my first real professional mentor, when I started interacting with you is when I really kind of doubled down and became, we call ourselves disability warriors in the office, but I think you're the one who really taught me how to become a warrior because of so many of the methods that you've created for, vocational expert cross, how to build and handle a case, and just really my entire viewpoint of the profession changed. And I went from being somebody who was good at generating clients and had a steady stream to somebody who could really go above and beyond to help them. Yeah. And that was, it's interesting how people enter your life at different periods of time. But, another thing, and you've always been a mentor for me, but one thing that's always stood out to you about me is just you've mentored so many people over time, and that's something that seems like it's been so valuable for you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's sort of a rough parallel even to what you're describing about your relationship with Nagel. So Bob, my boss, wasn't a mentor in the sense that he knew anything about this stuff. Because he'd be the first to admit even today that he knows nothing about it. He had other things that he was doing, but this was the very beginning when people were starting to advertise for this work, and because he had name recognition, the cases were piling up. So he really saw it, I don't want to say only, but he saw it as a revenue stream that he wasn't going to do any of the work on. So after Cliff left, was the first time, like within a few weeks or maybe a couple months, I was the first NOSCR conference that I went to because I really didn't know anything about it. But the way Bob was a mentor, two things I never forgot. One is that, he never overmanaged me. He was happy to see that I was, sort of a go-getter and took responsibility and figured out how to do things and probably screwed him up a lot, but, learned from my mistakes. And Cliff, even after he left, I mean, he was somebody I could always call. Yeah. But he didn't, but the point was he never sort of pretended like my success was his. His name was on everything. He got the, client, I would do all the work and they would send Bob a thank you note. I mean, that's fine. Your ego can handle that. But that was the way he was sort of a mentor to me. And the other thing that was like a really important to me was this was before I wasn't an attorney yet. Remember, I'm in law school. So back in those days.
So you started working for him in law school doing these cases?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was my first year of law school.
Wow.
So for 3.5 years, I was not a lawyer. And I was going to the hearings and I was handling the cases. And back in those days, technically speaking, that meant that the fees wouldn't be withheld from the claimant's past due benefits. Yeah. It's probably safe to say this now because it happened like 30 years ago. But like every judge in the Pittsburgh hearing office where I mostly was going, and some in Johnstown, Pennsylvania as well, they just all looked the other way. And nobody ever called us out on it. Because I think because I was doing a good job and because people weren't, for lack of a better way of putting it, up their rear end all day long about every little rule. So I always I never could forget that. Like I got in a way, like just from people being nice to me, like, the opportunity of a lifetime. And, it's kind of like that old SNL character, Social Security has been very, very good to me, and so I don't know why. It just, people come into my life, or whatever, and I like talking with folks, and it doesn't feel like effort to just talk with them. And some people you just end up talking to a lot, like
Yeah.
and those people, I guess technically you would call that something like a mentoring relationship. Yeah.
Did you connect with the work right away?
Yeah, pretty soon, pretty early on. At first, it was just scary because I didn't know anything about it. But I just liked the people that I got to work for so much. Like I didn't even come from a blue collar background. I kind of came from a no collar background. Lucky to have a shirt background, But those were the people that I related to. To this day, I don't really have that many friends that are like lawyers and stuff like that.
Right.
And so, yeah, it did. It clicked, and it was easy to be honest. At one level, once you figured out a lot of the moves, it wasn't exactly. It was demanding in terms of how much work there was to do, but the work itself wasn't. For lack of a better way of putting it, it wasn't exactly in those days rocket science.
Right.
Show up. You get all your clients there, and they don't just trip all over themselves in the hearing, you are probably going to win.
Where do people get it wrong? So, and let me give some context to that question.
Yeah.
So, like I said, you've mentored so many people. I remember at one point a few years ago through Nader has a mentorship program. You had like 5 or 6 mentees at one time, and that's a rolling thing. You're just always somebody that people are calling on for advice. What are people doing wrong, whether it comes to how they handle a case, how they're representing clients, how they approach their offices or their staff? What are the biggest things that you find yourself harping on and saying, I need you to focus this way or redirect?
Well, thank you, by the way. I probably never really had 5 at one time, but, it does seem like at any given point in time, there's always a couple.
Yeah.
Well, it's different, but I would say just going back to something that you said a minute ago, I think, and I can't remember exactly what it was, so, people listening might remember better than I do
Old
already.
age, yep,
but,
here we go. Setting in.
Yeah. No, I think what happened, especially to those of us who came through this, 30 and 20 years ago, is that you kind of, in a way, almost forgot that you were a lawyer. Because you didn't really have to do a lot of lawyer stuff. And then with everything that went on, beginning whatever that was 12, 13 years ago with sort of knuckling down, and in a lot of good ways, I might add. I'm not in that crowd of people who think that it's all bad or anything. It really kind of forced us, and some people just still aren't getting the message.
Right.
To sort of step up your game and remember what the heck a lawyer does. Or, well, in the case of non-attorneys, you kind of have to explain that to them. But there's elements to all of these things that we want to prove, whether it's that the claimant's past work is different from what the judge wants to say, or that the guy can do these 3, the vocational expert says the guy can do these 3 jobs. Well, there's steps to that. And you have to think it as linear as you would argue it if you're doing a good job, like in a brief, and you have to cover all those bases. And so I think that's one of the things, is that people want to skip all those steps. Partly with non-attorney reps, it's sometimes just because they don't realize those steps are there. And then with lawyers, I just don't have any patience for it. On the listserv, listserv, when somebody gets on there and says something really stupid, that you could just break down for yourself if you remembered even 0.5% of your legal training, right? How you go about disproving something isn't, for instance, yelling or complaining or whining about it, and so, yeah, I think somewhere, and especially in the last 15 years, I had to rediscover that, because I was no different than anybody else. The only difference in my case, I suppose, is that I didn't do a whole lot of standing on Social Security's shoulders and calling myself tall,
right?
But actually figuring out a way to do the work of proving things when the whole Social Security world wants you to just shut the heck up and go home.
And
so that's one thing. And then, sorry, I don't mean to just keep going on, but I think that the other big thing is, and you mentioned it really quickly in passing, is that, and by the way, speaking of mentoring, I can say a little bit of back at you there, because you've been one of the people in my life, as since we've met, that keeps reminding me, not like because you're telling me it, but I mean just the way you carry yourself and the things that you think about and say, that this is a business.
Yeah.
And it's a fine line. Every Social Security rep or attorney that I've ever known has a little bit of social worker in them. They like that payoff of a happy client and all that kind of stuff. But, being careful about how you run things and thinking about what you're doing and having a plan, this is a mystery lawyer or non-lawyer alike. I mean, maybe 70-80% of the people in this business don't even think of it as a business. And then they wonder why, if the fees don't come in for a month, why they can't sleep at night. Right. Yeah. Anyway, yes.
Well, and I think one place that you and I have really connected, and I've seen you evolve even in the 6, 7 years, 8 years, however long we've been friends for, is even though we know that it's a business with a purpose.
Yeah.
And that purpose isn't always just to line our pockets with cash. It's really to...
It isn't? Wait a minute, excuse me.
You can write this stuff down. Thanks for the
mentor,
pen, Katie.
Yeah.
But it's beyond just a profit motive. We see our businesses as a conduit to doing good in the community, and what's been kind of unique for us in my office to see happen is, we went from being a Cleveland, Ohio law firm to sort of a Northeast Ohio law firm to an Ohio firm. And now, we represent clients in almost all of the 50 states in the country. And how do we keep with that purpose, which is this isn't just about winning a case. It's how do we support our clients and how do we leave an imprint in the communities where they are. And it's so much easier where we are, but you guys do so much community work as well, working with social workers and local causes. And one thing that I want to make sure we talk about is this is an important month. We're in March, and it's Colon Cancer Awareness Month.
Yeah.
And this is a perfect example of how your firm has gotten involved in the community. You want to talk a little bit about why that's significant to you and what you're trying to do?
Yeah, let me just preface it because I knew we would come to this. Partly because we talked beforehand, but also because I would have guessed that anyway. So one of the things that's been like in our office, so we do have, and I know you do too, is the community involvement. So the partners have all kind of chosen, and so we're not representing, but supporting the causes of wounded veterans, because our managing partner is a Navy spouse and has a heart for that. And Lindsay, my wife, is also a law partner, and she's real big on an organization called Girls on the Run, if you've ever heard of it, and very involved in that. And that's super community oriented. They're in a very local way. What you're bringing up is, March is a kind of a big month for me because it's Colon Cancer Awareness Month, and I wish I could say, well, maybe I guess I don't. I'll take back what I was about to say. I wish I didn't have to say it at all, but the truth is, my awareness of that really came about as a result of my personal experience of being diagnosed with colon cancer 5 years ago. And so it's just not something you go through and sort of not notice things like the fact, for instance, that, this is an illness that, for reasons I don't think research people have figured out yet, is on the rise. And especially among younger people for some reason. Again, I think there are theories about it for sure, but nobody's really sort of exactly dialed in why this is. So one of the things we're doing this month at the office is a series of stories that are about me because, I have a personal story to tell about it, but hopefully that being tied in with a lot of other sort of promotions that we're doing through like LinkedIn and things like that to raise awareness, will, get some more money thrown at the problem.
And one thing that we'll do is we'll make sure to put in the show notes a link to everything that you're doing on your website and social media so people can see that. Let me ask you a question. How did your how did cancer change your relationship with work? Has it changed your relationship with work?
Well, so a couple things, I guess. Even before this all happened, you and I had talked about it, even that I had already been thinking in terms of succession plan and stuff like that. Partly it's because my wife's a lot younger than me, and I know I don't look like I should, but I have an 11-year-old, and who was, wow, now that I think, 6 when I got sick, and it was his birthday present, actually, as it turns out. But so I had been thinking about like how to build something that could last already. At the time I was just thinking about like doing something else or retiring maybe or something like that. But just that you do that, this needed to keep working, beyond my mortal existence or whatever. And I don't think it had so much to do with, carrying on my name or something like that, as much as just providing a place where Lynn's was comfortable. And
your wife?
Yeah, I'm sorry, right. My wife was comfortable and had a thing that, was a good place for her. And so I'd already been thinking about that. But yeah, I mean, there's no way that all of this has not sort of dialed up, let's say, the significance of that. So that was the one thing. And I think the other thing is that, as a sort of I don't want to say I'm a workaholic, because I go home every night at a normal time, but my head's in that game so much. So I think part of what this has been for me is sort of a wake-up call to, like, get a freaking hobby, or I have them, but I mean, actually work at something like that, and take trips and have a bucket list and things like that. And it's not terribly philosophical, because I mostly still just work, but I need that like decompression or whatever, because this is stressful stuff between the clients and all the nonsense and hoops that they make us jump through and stuff. It's not fun like it used to be.
So it sounds like, a big change has been thinking about your future and doing things that help you connect with your family. Which almost are steps back from work. But when it comes to when you are working, and maybe even going back to, we were just talking about your role in the community and what your business is doing, do you think that your own experience with cancer has like furthered your interest in getting yourself involved with other organizations and seeing that your firm expands the footprint there?
Yeah, so I think another way of, it's just a weird thing, like when you're going through this, I mean, I had surgery twice, and everybody thinks that's the worst part, but it actually, from at least in my experience, it wasn't really that big a deal to have surgery.
Right.
What drove me nuts was 2 times going through a chemo ward, and every 3 months you get these tests, and you don't think about it, but you really are somewhere in your brain. And so I would just spend like a month out of every 3 months being anxious without realizing why until the last minute, because you go in, you get this blood test, and then you find out, right? Am I getting better or not?
Yeah.
And so living 3 months at a time, I have to say, for, probably the first 3.5 years, and this all started 5 years ago, first 3.5 years of this, I really just worked, and I was, I don't know, like autopilot. Like I knew what I was doing was important for the bigger picture and all that kind of stuff, but I wasn't feeling it. But I didn't do anything for that to change. But yeah, like about 1.5 years ago, I finally started. Well, I don't know. It seems weird to say this, but I actually, that was when I actually started to believe, holy crap, like I might actually not be dying, And so since then I've been much more like thinking outward and thinking of projects and things of that nature. So in a very general way, yeah, that's true. I can point at some things, One of my other uh, deep concerns, which it's a big, long story of why. So just kind of accept it at face value, because I know it's hard to believe, but things Social Security really isn't like the whole world. Seems hard to believe because it's not how I've lived.
Right. Now we're going to ask every guest this question.
Okay.
And you're sitting down, so I don't have to worry about you fainting here. But I didn't give you a lot of time to think about this. But I'm curious, thinking about your life, business, it doesn't matter where it comes from, but something that guides you. What I want to know is, what's the best advice that you've ever been given? If you could teach your kids one thing, and I'm sure you have done this, but what would you tell them? What's the best advice that drives you?
I think the thing that, and this really, you mentioned that before, but the way you said it the first time before we went on air was a little bit more like...
Told you I didn't give you preparation.
Right, that's right. So it felt more like it was going to be about work or something. Now you're kind of talking more like philosophically.
Yeah.
So I would say, right off the top of my head, and this is probably going to be the right answer, so to speak, even when I think about it later, is that all the judging that people do of other people, I know that sounds kind of wimpy, but to me that just runs deep. You know, it's why it's why we're mad at the judges all the time. It's why, you know, to make it about Social Security, but it's also what gets us into trouble, like with people that we have to come in contact with. I should say, I'm sorry. It's especially if you spend any time on social media, you know, you're inclined to believe that the whole world are just a bunch of stupid idiots or something like that, right? And I don't know, you know, maybe in some sort of objective sense that may be somewhat true even, but it doesn't do any good for me to dwell on it. I mean, because all it does, at least in my case, is it makes me angry, and it makes me anxious, and it makes me not open, you know, to new experiences or people that might have been good for me to meet and talk to or something. I know that's not necessarily a well thought through answer, but honestly, I think that
it's philosophical
this
for sure.
Sort of way that people get in their head about, like, oh, you know, because this is the whole basis for why I'm better than you or you me and all that kind of stuff, and it just doesn't help anything. It really doesn't. We're all just...
Do you find yourself fighting off the urge to, I guess, resist that advice?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the time, because you have to deal with a lot of dopes, you know.
Sure.
And I say that as lovingly as I possibly can.
Yeah.
You know?
What do you do to try and keep yourself centered on that?
Well, I mean, I think sometimes the best answer is disengagement, right? You know, just not doing it. You know, I mean, I've had, I definitely won't get into the specifics of it, but, you know, quite recently, like in my professional life, you know, I agreed to take on a task, and I've hated every minute of it for over a year. And it's mainly because of the people I have to work with. So I just decided I'm going to honor my commitment, but I'm just refuse to take this situation seriously since nobody else seems to be.
It's so interesting that you use that as an example, because so often I find that, like you said, I find myself, you know, annoyed with a task that I have, but really I'm oftentimes just annoyed with the people that I'm engaged with while doing that task.
Because there's nothing like being on a good team of people that give a crap about what they're doing, and they're not trying to one up each other, and you know, and you're all kind of pulling in the same direction. Yeah, it's just wonderful.
And you can almost flip it where I might enter a task hating it, but if I'm doing it with people that I like doing something with, that's more important to me than anything else. And it's almost, you know, I almost getting tired of making pandemic references, but the isolation that we all felt and the lack of connectivity really highlighted that, because I found myself more annoyed than ever because I was doing so many things by myself, and now the same thing with the ability to interact with colleagues or certain family members, it makes me happier to do the same activity that I didn't enjoy earlier. So I think that's actually really profound.
No, I mean, I had forgotten about that, but you're right. There's no question at all. You know, in my case, the second time when I was diagnosed in January of 2018. No, yeah, 18, and looked like I was doing fine. And then the blood test came back like suspicious, and boom, 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 I had another surgery. And that other surgery happened like a month and a half or 2 months before COVID started. And I actually forgot about that so that was a year that I was already like not in a good mood a lot. And then I was by myself a lot. And it also happened to be two things happened. One good thing. Well, they're both good things. That was an election year. And I've always been a political animal. But I just realized it's just so unhealthy for me to spend any time thinking about it. Because it's the same friggin' story every day. It's just a slightly different person is at the center of it, you know, and all the arguing. I mean, it's gotten worse over the years, but all the arguing about this guy versus that guy or gal. And it just felt, and I finally absorbed the idea that, you know what, this is almost practically meaningless. Right. I mean, it's not meaningless that you vote and stuff. I'm not saying that. But all the jabber is useless and pointless. And I realized, you know, when you're going to decide who to vote for, and I did this last time for the first time ever, I consume no news at all. Almost.
For how long?
Probably in my case about 2.5 years.
Wow.
Now, I'm not saying I don't look at things that I've chosen to look at, but I don't have TV news on and things like that, for instance, in the house. So this last time I proved to myself what I thought was true, which is that you can learn everything you need to know about which guy you're going to vote for tomorrow, tonight. Okay, you don't need to like go through all that ups and downs of it. So but the reason why that was a thing, and I know this seems weird, but like one of the things about COVID was that my office is very close by, and nobody else was going there, so I got to go to my actual sit in my own chair every day because no one else was there to worry about. So I was actually able to go down to work every day. But since the kids were home a lot on account of school schedules and stuff, I wasn't down there as much as usual. And I had bought my wife a new port. We got a new one put on, and it wraps around instead of just being in the front. And she loves it, and I only thought of it as hers. But that COVID year, man, all of a sudden I became like this porch sitter. And it was just the front of our house is pretty, nice trees, you know, all that stuff. Just what everybody's got, you know. But I just like noticing this stuff for the front. I kind of realized, I actually bought a chair just to sit on the front porch. And so all of this like was, you know, mattered a lot, you know, to just slow down. And I'm not obviously calling the pandemic good. Yeah. But it definitely was part. I mean, that's a big, long story in service of something you said in a sentence or two. But I mean, it was. I think that was a really big part of it. Like it just slowed things down enough to, you know. I mean, I guess anybody could have just spent all day on their phone learning about the next awful thing that so and so said or something like that. But for some reason, it just became obvious to me that I didn't want to do that anymore.
Well, I have loved having you for this conversation. It is the Triple D podcast. We've done disability. We've had discourse, but we haven't had donuts.
Yeah.
And again, we're here at Landmark Restaurant and Bakery in Youngstown, Ohio, and they have been gracious enough to provide us with a bevy of treats for us to pick from. I'm thinking what we do is we use some of these utensils and go halfsies on something so we can each sample. What do you think about that, Karl?
That's fine, yeah. I mean, there were some normal-sized donuts in that one box.
They did give us some monstrosities to enjoy. We've got a whole list here of what we can enjoy.
That's a maple for sure.
We've got a maple. We've got a coconut glazed croissant. We've got that, I believe, is in the bag.
Yeah,
we've got a Boston cream, a PB&J.
Yeah.
with the strawberry on
I
top.
thought that was peanut butter.
What looks best to you here, and then we'll figure out what we're
I think
eating.
this blue, that looks like it's probably blueberry of some sort.
Let's get into that.
Pink frosted looks pretty good.
On my YouTube series, Go Nuts for Donuts, we've rated a lot of donuts, but we've never done a blueberry donut, so I think today is the day. Do a little cheers.
Oh, yeah.
Here we go. Let's hear it, Karl. Let's get a bite. And oh, this is good. This is delicious.
Oh, wow.
What do you think? You gonna make the
I
hour
like
drive back from Pittsburgh soon?
Yeah, plenty of energy. And this isn't. I was going to say plenty of energy from the sugar, but you know the cake part of this donut is really just like spot on, like
Excellent.
super moist and not like overly sugared.
It's not just
at least that's how I judge a donut.
It's not just the blueberry icing on top. They've got actual blueberries clearly baked right into it.
Yeah, that's extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm so glad that you took the time out of your busy schedule. I know you just had a oral argument this morning with the court. And so I appreciate you then taking the time to come out and spend your afternoon with me. But
anytime.
It has been a pleasure working with you for so long, and most importantly, just being your friend.
Yeah, thank you, by the way. I should have said when I was telling the cancer story, you know, you were always like one of those guys that was checking in, and believe me, that ain't everybody.
Well, it's because I was hoping I was in your will if something were to happen. But, you know, then as soon as I found out I wasn't, the call frequency dipped.
Yeah, I've been hearing from you so much lately, I guess. Yeah.
Well, thank you so
right,
much,
man.
Karl.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Triple D Podcast, Donuts, Disability, and Discourse. Rate, subscribe, and tune in next week for more Discourse and Donuts.